Due to the graphic nature of this program, viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to today's broadcast. It's the Tuesday, July 21st, 2026 episode of the Marco Jure Show, the only show where the facts are facts and hard truths thrive. What better way to start the Tuesday show than with an article straight from the New York Post highlighting the rampant fraud by use of Medicaid in our country that you and I, of course, pay for and facilitate this high level of theft. This process to mitigate the government fraud by the Trump administration is long overdue, folks. We should have had this long ago. But we've also got to stop wasting taxpayer dollars on this war that we find ourselves in and really funding other wars worldwide. I think that would be a great step in the right direction. We want to start saving our own money, as I've said to you many times. But you know what else I've often said to you? We need to bring Doge back in some form or another. There's so much fraud in the government itself that is 100% pure garbage that needs to go. One that comes to mind, the Department of Education, complete failure. Why do we have this? Let it go back to the states. Trump is 100% right on this. Department of Housing and Urban Development, get rid of it. What do we need it for? And why do we have both a Labor Department and a Commerce Department? Let one absorb both jobs. I'm sure they can do it. And let's let it run as is. What about the Department of Agriculture? What has it done besides nothing to help small farmers the past 50, 60 years? Crushed them. That's all it does. Reduce the size of government and watch innovation flow through creative minds in these areas. That's what'll work. We don't need the government to oversee all this. Let's cut the scope of government down. That's what we should be doing. But back to my main point here. We're talking about Medicaid today. And just what a complete disaster it has been, as you could obviously imagine. As I said before, New York Post article, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said today that he's stopping more than $1 billion in federal Medicaid payments to both California and Minnesota over suspected fraud. Now, this is a step in the right direction. Now, why do I say this to you? Because looking into this more deeply, when you look at how fraudulent these states are, just in this year, just in 2026 alone, $1.3 billion has been deferred by Health and Human Services, only to suspicions of fraud in just the Medicaid system, which is called Medi-Cal, for those of you that are familiar with California. But California has historically posted hundreds of millions of dollars in recoveries. They've found some $513 million in fiscal year 2024 attributed to its Medicaid fraud control unit. This is how deep this rot is. Just in the Medicaid sector. Can you imagine going through all these other different programs and handouts and NGOs that they have in California? It's unbelievable. This money that they get. And again, there's no oversight to this. No, they dish the money out and nothing gets followed up on. This is part of the problem. Now, we got individual cases, too, in California. Multi-million-dollar fraud schemes. Again, if you go back to this case in 2023, there's 2.5 million in phantom billing cases. I mean, these are just one of many examples, folks. And by the way, it's a big state, big population, almost 40 million Californians, and look what's going on here. But this is all funded by the federal government. This is the problem. And again, there's no oversight on this. I would rather have a department overseeing this than just somebody leading some other one of the programs I mentioned to you earlier. But at least this would be something beneficial. Make sure the money's going where it needs to go and it's being used as it's supposed to be used. But we're not seeing that. And that's part of the outcry by the public and people like myself. Looking over at Minnesota, too, we know that crime is rampant in Minnesota as well in this sector. Now, there is no public federal deferral amount just yet. So there's no figure like $1.3 billion in Medicaid, just like in California. However, the state-specific totals are not broken out. However, it's still considered high-risk, high-activity state for enforcement teams, investigation. We know that J.D. Vance was said to be looking at this. And by the way, absolutely, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you when we see the other types of fraud going on in states like Minnesota, California, New York, Illinois, just to name a few? I just figured I would do that for you. So while there's no official dollar figure just yet, they believe that the alleged statewide fraud is really comparable to that of California. Can you imagine that? A state as big and as populous as California is akin to a state like Minnesota, run right in the ground like Tim Walz. Oh, it's unbelievable, folks. Absolutely unbelievable that this is happening right now. So yes, flag for major enforcement activity. Absolutely. Look at these states. And by the way, what RFK Jr. is doing is actually really brilliant. What Kennedy said was if California and Minnesota, they want to get this money to fund low-income health care, what they need to do is provide documentation that these payments are legitimate. Can Newsom and Walz do this? Of course they can. They're ignoramuses. They're morons. They don't know how to run anything. Just run their mouths. That's it. There's nothing else to it. Empty suits through and through. That's what we're seeing here. And that's why they let the crime run as it is. They like this. These are the people that would support them in, say, a presidential election. You better believe it. But Kennedy also blamed the Biden administration. Well, who couldn't? And, of course, the Democratic leadership in both blue states for the alleged misuse of taxpayer dollars. By the way, RFK Jr. is one of the focal points of, obviously, Make America Great Again. Of course, Make America Healthy Again. But he's right on the money on this one. Absolutely 100%. He said, instead of protecting your money, they open the floodgates to theft. They dismantle basic program integrity and oversight. He's 100% correct on this one. 100% correct. And by the way, let me just say this to you. If people are going to take government money, if they're going to take federal grants or programs or utilize them, every single year they should have an audit. So in other words, if I say, hey, I have this medical program I'm funding, low income, it's going to do this for this people, and I set up a program and all this. Every year I should be audited on this. And every year you should have somebody come by and saying, is Marco Dre's doing X, Y, and Z, what she filled out in this documentation? Is it filled in with the state of New York or the state of California or the state of Illinois? However it works. And people need to follow up on this. But there is no follow-up, and that's part of the problem. And that's why these people understand they can get away with murder here, which is ripping off the taxpayer. The rot also in this, it's unbelievable here. Just a month ago, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche announced that 455 people were charged for $6.5 billion in healthcare fraud schemes. Now, I know some of you are asking, well, Gervais, what does that mean? Now, we're talking specifically with RFK Jr. just in the Medicaid program. This is one aspect of the overall healthcare fraud. So all that fills into the healthcare program. Healthcare is just the big umbrella over it. So that's what Todd Blanche delved into, and he found this. I mean, this is unbelievable. I mean, the feds say this was one of the greatest combined federal and state efforts in combating healthcare fraud in history. Again, charging these individuals who use taxpayer fund programs used to pay for luxury lifestyles. Isn't that good? We see illegal aliens in places like Minneapolis, among other places. Again, saying we have this healthcare program, we have this program. And what are they doing? They're buying cars, they're buying, funding vacations, buying nice clothing, and then they never offer these programs whatsoever. This has got to stop, folks. This type of fraud has got to stop, certainly at a state level, but certainly coming from the federal taxpayer dollars. What are we paying this money for? And by the way, I want to see heads roll on this one. I want to see the people that have been doing this, that have been ripping off the government, first of all, either give whatever money they have back, but they need to either, if they're illegal aliens, they need to go. 100%, they need to go. If their scheme is to come to the United States and just rip off the country, they need to get the hell out of here. That's first and foremost. But secondly, what needs to happen is we need to make sure that this stops. And the way we do that is by more documentation, more follow-up, more oversight. Look into these programs. They need to be under scrutiny 24/7. There should be follow-up programs to this. So in other words, they should be reporting what they're actually doing constantly. Every single month, I saw X number of patients. I charged this amount of money, used this fund, which I got. All this should be documented. And I'm not trying to say we should merge healthcare with the United States government, but what I am saying is there needs to be verification, right? Think about trust but verify. Same exact concept, ladies and gentlemen. So that's that, and I'm happy to see that this is moving in the right direction. And by the way, this is one of the areas the Trump administration is doing a great job, by the way. And it just shocks me that if we can be so on it with this, why can't we be on it with everything else? Why can't we be on it with cutting taxes, bringing in more jobs, bringing in more in the manufacturing sector? Why do we have to be focused on things like these foreign policy issues like going to war with Iran or fomenting and continuing the war with Ukraine? Why are we doing this? Focus on what's inside our borders first. That's going to be my focal point for this entire week. That's my mantra, I'd have to say. And by the way, just to juxtapose this with what's going on in the country itself, I saw this on a Fox Business this morning, and I said, again, great idea. Look at this. Just another call for oversight. Treasury intercepts nearly $99 million in federal payments to deceased individuals under Trump fraud order. This, again, you got to laugh a little bit. How are deceased people getting these checks? Well, of course, there's, again, rampant fraud. Either people steal social security numbers, use that. Again, the documentation isn't there to verify someone's been dead. Sometimes you have family members using the program to get the money back. It's all rotten, folks. It really is. But Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who was with Maria Bartiromo, discussed President Trump's payment verification system that blocked nearly almost $100 million in payments to deceased people and could potentially stop some $350 million just this year alone. So now he's using this Executive Order 14249, which is called Protecting America's Bank Account Against Fraud, Waste, and Abuse. Again, good program. And what they're doing, they're implementing a verification process that reviewed more than 885 million different payments, totaling approximately $2.77 trillion. Not a small fee, ladies and gentlemen, not a small fee. And by the way, this program said that the improper usage could reach some $500 billion. That's 1.66% of the overall GDP inside the United States itself. So, we think about Medicaid, we think about other programs where people are getting benefits, whether it be Social Security, whatever it may be. We need to obviously make sure that the people who are getting these funds, these services, these payouts are actually getting them and it's being used properly. I don't think anybody could disagree with this except criminals themselves. That's why you have people like Gavin Newsom, Tim Walz, who oppose these types of things, but really and truly, we need to be on this. Anyways, let's listen to Scott Bessent really quick, just to explain this program. I don't always agree with Scott Bessent, but right here, I think he's on the money. Take a listen.
President Trump issued an executive order for us to be able to go to the do not pay, to have it interact with the Treasury payment systems. And as a result, so far, we've saved about $100 million, payments that didn't go to deceased people and that would have gone out. We think that there's up to $350 million that we can stop for the end of this year, and that goes along with the Vice President's task force on eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. The GAO estimates that it might be, this number might be up to $500 billion, which is about 1.66% of GDP. So that could go a long way towards paying down the debt, providing more services, and this is just the start, Maria.
Again, great idea. This is really Doge in and of itself. But this is how we start to cut things down. This is how we use things like in the Social Security Administration. We look at the master files. We have to follow up on this, folks. Well, we just don't do it. And this is why people we get ripped off. Again, the taxpayer's getting ripped off here, folks. Remember, we call it government money, but it's always taxpayer dollars. That's what it always is. Now, following the initial projections estimating some $330 million in net benefits between 2024 and 2026, Congress made the Verification Authority permanent through the Ending Improper Payments to Deceased People Act. Can you imagine this? These are the types of programs that we have to sign into law, which President Trump did last February. But this is the truth, folks. When you have dishonest people, when you have people that abuse a system that would do something like this, you have to create these types of programs. Never forget what I told you, what John Adams said. Our Constitution is for a moral and just people. He wasn't wrong about this. Look who's ripping off the system here. It's unbelievable here. But again, this new safeguard addresses, again, the longstanding vulnerability, and it really helps ensure that every single dollar used, given by the federal government, is spent to reach the intended recipient. This is what Scott Besson is saying right now. He's absolutely right about this. So yes, oversight has to be a number one priority, especially when we have these types of programs. There's no other way to it. It's got to be that way, folks. And by the way, let me move on to what President Trump is doing today, ladies and gentlemen. He's meeting with Lebanese President Joseph Aoun to advance Israel's pullout and disarming of Hezbollah. I think that's a wishful dream of his. I don't see that working anytime soon, unfortunately for him. But the two leaders have met, and they will discuss, obviously, what Hezbollah is doing. Now, here in the article in the Washington Times, it's saying here that Hezbollah are terrorists, which, again, I disagree with these terms. Number one, Hezbollah was formed for what reason, folks? Let's break down the history here. Hezbollah formed because of Israel's illegal occupation in southern Lebanon starting back in 1978. Hezbollah didn't even really officially form until the mid-1980s. Later on, they kicked the Israelis out. Again, that's why they're there. But the idea that they're going to disarm Hezbollah is simply just not going to happen. Now, I know why Trump wants to do this, because Netanyahu wants him to do this. Without Hezbollah, then Israel gets to stay. Aoun, who is really just a puppet of the United States, as much of the Lebanese government itself, simply just will let them do whatever they want. But now they want what they want to do. This is just so funny to me. And Hezbollah is not going to go for this. They want the Lebanese armed forces to go in and actually disarm them. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen, just like they're not going to disarm Hamas. It's not going to happen. They're not going to put down their weapons, because when they do, what that leads to is an Israel occupation of this territory, of which they have no right to be in. They don't have any right to be in southern Lebanon. What gives them the right to be there? Can somebody answer that for me? Of course you can, because there's no right for them to be there. Lebanon is a sovereign nation. They've established their borders. So why would Israel be there? Oh, to fight Hezbollah. Well, again, who attacked who first? Obviously, it was Israel that invaded first. They were in a region of which they're not supposed to be in. And then again, Hezbollah obviously was getting them out of there. That's what happened. That's what it led to this. So again, when we talk about the history of the region, it wasn't Hezbollah that formed first. It was the Israeli occupation that was illegal that happened first, that sprung up Hezbollah, that lives largely in southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River. They're not going to allow 1.5 million Lebanese in that region to be displaced, to be told never to return to their homes, that Israel's going to create a buffer zone now between, again, Israel and Lebanon. Again, ridiculousness. Absolutely ridiculousness. Now, in the article, it goes on, the Shia militant group. Well, yeah, of course they are. That's their religion. But again, this has to do with land, has to do with territory, has to do with resources in the region. Israel wants to pull water from the Litani River. So there's more to the story than what meets the eye in this article, of course. But again, I don't see Hezbollah, which again is a political party inside Lebanon, saying, you know what? We're going to put our weapons down. We're going to pray to God that the Israelis don't take this land from us, that don't remove us from our own land, of which we live on, we have lived on, and that they'll never come back. We'll take their word on this. Yeah, how's that going to go over? Unbelievable, really, when you think about it. But that's what's going on here, of course. We had Marco Rubio chiming in, of course, on Sunday, saying that he commended, referring to Joseph Aoun, his courage in his government's work to reclaim their country and advance towards peace. Notice they don't say this about Netanyahu. Why is Trump not telling Netanyahu to get out of the region? Right? This was one of the main precursors of the Memorandum of Understanding. That was the first point. All war ends on all fronts, including Lebanon. So why is Israel still there? Again, who fired the first shots? Who was in the wrong territory first? It was obviously the Israelis. And this is what it comes down to. He goes on to say the United States remains committed to supporting this effort and Lebanon's efforts to deliver security, peace, and a better future for the Lebanese people. You know how many thousands of people have been killed just in these attacks by Israel? At least 3,600 people have been killed. Christians and Muslims alike, by the way, folks. So while we have set up the Lebanese government, folks, again, we have different Again, factors, you have different types of Muslim leaders and Christian leaders in the country, but largely in part, it's roughly 55%, I think, or it might be a little bit more than that now. 55%, maybe 60% now Muslim, and the reigning factor is roughly Christian. But what's happening now is very interesting. The Lebanese people are coming together, whether Christian or Muslim alike, because of this illegal occupation. They don't want this. They don't want to have Israel in southern Lebanon because they're never going to leave. It's not going to be a buffer zone. It's going to be a land grab. It's going to be an annexation, just like the Golan Heights was an annexation of what Israel's trying to do in terms of Greater Israel. And by the way, if you don't believe me, I encourage everybody to look it up. You can look up Greater Israel. You can look at their map and what they would like to achieve, and you'll see exactly what they want to do. Hezbollah's not stupid. They understand this. And by the way, Joseph Aoun understands this as well. This is why it doesn't make any bit of sense to me. You have a country that's attacking your people, that's killing your people, and you want to disarm Hezbollah? Really? I guess that runs for logic maybe in certain circles in Lebanon. I don't think most people would agree with all that. Now, President Trump has insisted that the U.S. and Israel remain on the same page, but he's urged Netanyahu to urge more caution and avoid civilian deaths in his attacks on Hezbollah. It's amazing to me. Both Trump and Netanyahu set out a board of peace, yet they're fomenting war all throughout the region. It's unbelievable, folks. Really, it is. Again, I try to give Trump credit where I can. You know that. But again, this is a wrong move. He should be working with Netanyahu to say, you need to get out of this region. This will alleviate a lot of the tension with Iran right now, but the Israelis want the land. They're not going to leave when they see this as an opportune moment for them. Iran is focused on what the United States is doing and vice versa. Again, Hezbollah, obviously Hezbollah is a little bit dismantled because all of the Iranian forces and obviously their supply is focused on what they're doing with the United States. It's really a genius scheme when you think about it. Israel goes in first. They murder the Ayatollah. The United States comes in right behind. Iran responds. We're in a war. Israel gets out of the conflict with Iran, and they decide to invade in southern Lebanon. It's a brilliant scheme, folks. Really, you gotta give Netanyahu credit. You gotta give him credit. The guy's not stupid, not by a long shot. He's evil, right? He's going to bite off more than he can chew here. He's going to ruin the state of Israel, but really, it's a genius scheme when you really think about what he is trying to accomplish here for the Greater Israel Project. And by the way, since we're talking about the war, it seems like we're going to be going back and forth with, obviously, the Iranians at this point. President Trump posted yesterday on Truth Social, just yesterday afternoon, and said, every time Iran kills an American soldier, they will pay for that killing many times over. This directive has been passed on to the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Daniel Kaine, and every leader in the military, President Donald J. Trump. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this resuming of the war didn't even have to take place. I'm looking here at an article in Time magazine. It says almost 100 U.S. troops have been injured over the last 2 weeks since the resumption of the war with Iran. That's just the figures coming from the Pentagon. The numbers could be higher, obviously. Now, they have said to some degree that those injured since July 7th, 96% of them have indeed returned back to duty. That's great, but what about the 4% that have not? What about the 5 that I told you about just yesterday in the bombing in Jordan that were sent to Germany on medevac that were likely not to live? What about those people? You got to understand something, folks. The numbers they're giving us probably are not likely true. With the immense bombing that's been going on at our various military bases, now with the attacks on Jordan, at the Muwafaq Salti Air Base, among others, again, the Iranians are upping the ante here. So when we see this new talk about casualties and, of course, deceased service members, that's letting you know that the Iranians are really on point with what's going on. They're hitting their targets. They're hitting a lot of what they need to hit. And by the way, I mentioned it before. The United States has several targets, right? It's probably somewhere in the hundreds, maybe even more than that, of targets of which they're trying to hit. Remember, this is the size of Western Europe. All the Iranians have to hit are really about 10 or so different air bases in the region to mitigate what the United States is trying to do to them. So in other words, if they're using Muwafaq Salti in Jordan, if they really want to stymie that, they could just bomb the airbase, and that will do away with what's going on, make it inoperable. We've seen this in Al-Udeid, among others. Again, all throughout the region, we're getting pummeled, hitting our radar systems, hitting different bases. All this is putting a damper on what we can do. So while we hear President Trump talk about things such as, they're being decimated, the real question is, okay, if they're being decimated, then why are they still able to attack? Why are they still able to kill our service members? That's the question you have to ask yourself. President Trump was speaking in the White House just recently, and this is what he had to say to a reporter who was asking, what do we do because Iran is not letting up? Let's take a listen.
Mr. President, there are no signs that Iran is ready to stop fighting. So what is the plan? Is the plan to just keep bombing until they give up?
There are no signs. What, you know something that I don't know?
Well, they continue to attack our allies and kill Americans.
You don't know what the dialogue is behind the scenes, that they want to meet desperately to try and end it because they're getting decimated. You don't get that when you listen to your fake station, but you don't know. You don't know anything.
So talks are
you know
still
something
possible,
that I don't know? Do you know something I don't know?
Well, tell us.
I will tell you, they want to desperately meet, and until they're ready to meet in a meaningful way, we have no interest in even.
No interest in stopping? Really? Again, I have to shake my head on this. This is, again, ridiculousness. Who in the Iranian side is saying that they would like to meet? Ask yourself that question. Has Galibaf come out? Has Arachi come out? Has Pezeshkian come out and said, we really need to make a deal right now? Have any of the Pakistani leadership, who's trying to mediate all this, come out and said, yeah, we're going to meet for negotiations sometime soon? None of that is taking place. So when President Trump keeps saying this, understand something. He's trying to manipulate the market. Oh, yeah, we're in talks. They're decimated. We've decimated this. The military's decimated. Folks, no one in the Iranian side is saying this. It's just not true. And we know this because they would have said this already. And when we look at things like the markets, for instance, we see exactly what's going on there. Remember what I told you yesterday. This is all crucial, folks. This is all, again, why Trump is saying this. Oh, do you know something I don't know? Well, what do you know, Mr. President? Why didn't you tell us? Oh, they desperately want to make it. How many times have we heard this? We're winning the war. They want to make a deal. We've heard this at least 100 times thus far since this war began on February the 28th. Look at the price of Brent crude right now. It's up. Right now, it's $91.10 per barrel. West Texas Intermediate, $84.99. Everything is up over 2% today. Those numbers are going up, folks, and they're not going to stop. Now, I said this to you on yesterday's show. We are experiencing an oil shock. And as Edward Dowd tells us, if the oil stays above that $100 per barrel for any extended period of time, we're in lots of trouble economically. We are going to be entering a global recession. That's not good for the United States. It's not good for the world. We're seeing our bond markets going up too, by the way, folks. Over 4.5% for the 10-year bond. Today, it's 4.63%. What did I tell you before about that? I said once that hits 5%, we're in trouble. Everything is creeping upwards. Everything is creeping upwards. And, we can look at the market and say, oh, well, Gerace, the markets are great. The markets are great. Sure, the markets can be great, but we know they're heavily influenced by these investors who are heavily putting money into AI. So that's not indicative of Main Street, what's happening on Wall Street. And by the way, just to reiterate what we're talking about here, just because you hear Trump saying that we have negotiations, that doesn't mean anything's going to stop. We were in negotiations a week ago. We couldn't even hold this understanding to get to negotiations for more than, a couple weeks at best? And then we just resumed this because we stupidly decided to go in and start escorting ships through the Omani side of the Strait of Hormuz. What was the purpose of all that? Well, it was to get us back into the war. There had to be a precursor for this. Was there not? What was that? And that was that the Iranians fired on a ship. Why did the Iranians fire on a ship? Because they defied what the Iranians said. They made it very clear before they even did this, the day before. They said, you will work with us, you will coordinate with us, you will go through the Iranian side of the Strait of Hormuz, you will fill out the necessary paperwork, just as people have been doing. What do the United States do? Listen to what we have to say. Go through the Omani side. Just hug the Omani side of the strait. Go through. Don't worry about it. Ignore the Iranians. We'll get those ships through. Ladies and gentlemen, none of that was in the understanding. None of it was. What Section 5 said was the Iranians will coordinate and make arrangements for ships to traverse the strait, to transit the strait with their blessing, if you will. They won't charge a toll, but they will work with them. Or that's how it works. So all the ships that got through didn't pay any tolls. And as I said to you before, find me a ship that worked with the Iranians, that listened to what they had to say, that went through the Iranian side. And by the way, why would you want to go through the Omani side when you don't even know where any of these sea mines are? We haven't even demined this yet. So I would imagine you would want to listen to the Iranians, ladies and gentlemen. Wouldn't you? If you're a ship captain and you're trying to traverse and you know that there are sea mines that have been laid by the Iranians, wouldn't you want to listen to them over the United States, who had no business interjecting in this? But we know what the purpose of this was, folks. We understand this, because J.D. Vance said the quiet part out loud. Oh, we're just using this memorandum of understanding just to buy more time to get more resources to the region, get more supplies to the region. And then, of course, what happened? The war started right back up, just after a short period of time. We had no intention of doing this. We never even followed through with one step of this. We didn't stop the war in Lebanon. This meeting with Aoun is to disarm Hezbollah, not stop with the Israeli aggression in the region. Let's call things as they are, folks. That's why this is all happening. We had no intention of stopping this. Trump wants to go on with this. I think it's idiotic. I think it's wrong. And this only leads to more of our brave men and women in the region to possibly be hurt or even killed, as we're starting to acknowledge now, as we have 18 total now deaths of this war. President Trump, of course, vows revenge for the 3 slain military members. Folks, it doesn't need to happen this way. This war is what happens. Never forget this. Never forget when I tell you this. War is what happens when diplomacy and negotiations fail. Never forget that. And don't forget, a lot of people make a hell of a lot of money off war. Just ask General Keane sometime. He'll tell you, if he's honest with you. Anyways, just wanted to share that with you, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, if not to make matters worse, you're going to love this one. This is out of CNBC. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer on Tuesday signaled another round of President Donald Trump's tariffs is on the way. Isn't that nice? So while we're experiencing 4.2% inflation, we have 3.5% core inflation. That means what you pay when you go to the store. Now we're going to slap on more tariffs. This is what he said to CNBC's Squawk Box. He said, we expect to see some action soon. I can't really specify a timeline right now. I have a responsibility to brief Congress and other stakeholders before I really reveal that kind of thing. But we do expect action soon. Isn't that nice? So let's stop for just a moment. We see prices are increasing right now. That should upset you because, again, why are we paying more? Well, what's the purpose for this? We know that we paid more for goods last year when President Trump issued the first round of these tariffs, of which he's obsessed with for some reason, ignoring the fact that a tariff is a tax on your goods. Call it a tax, call it a duty, call it an excise, call it whatever you want, a levy. It is a tax. It is a tax. It's a tax on what you purchase for imports coming in to the country. So if you like Colombian coffee, ladies and gentlemen, and there's a tax on that now at 10%, a 15% tax, you're paying 10 to 15% more of that original cost. So whenever you hear tariff, just think tax. I'm getting taxed. I'm getting taxed again. That's what's happening right now. So why in a time when we have rising inflation, amidst this war, or just on the precipice of this oil shock, which is going to just completely upend the entire economy globally, not just the United States, why would you then put on more tariffs on imports coming in the country? Ask yourself that. If you can figure out the answer, please let me know why that makes sense to you, because it doesn't make any sense to me. President Trump in February imposed a blanket 10% tariff under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. calling it, of course, calling this after the Liberation Day tariff regime was ended by the Supreme Court. So President Trump went through another line of legislation in order to do this. Once this ends, of course, then he's going to do this again. It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me. And the funniest part about all this, nobody seems to give a damn. There was a massive transfer from the government to these corporations, these businesses that paid these tariffs, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, they got money back. You know who didn't get money back, folks? You and I, the consumer. We got screwed on all this. So imagine that. They rose the prices because their imports cost more. And that money went right to the Treasury right off the bat before it even gets off the ship, right? That money goes to the Treasury. Fantastic, right? We're getting all this money, right? Billions of dollars. Okay. Well, those businesses then have to relay that on to their pricing then. Okay, I had to pay X number percentage more for whatever good I'm going to be having on my shelf now, or whatever commodity it is, or whatever I assemble. It costs more. That means that sticker price now, that cost has got to go up. Otherwise, I'm losing money. So for a little bit of time, a lot of these businesses can eat this up. I've seen small businesses do this, by the way. But they can only do it for so long. And then at some point, they have to start raising prices. That's just the way it has to go. Otherwise, they're losing out on money. Not going to happen. If you can't make a profit, you're going to go out of business. That's just the way it works. So what happened in return was, now these businesses, again, I imagine it's large businesses too, of course. Think of the Walmarts, the Staples, all these big businesses in the country. The corporations. They're getting money back on top of that now. So it's a transfer of wealth. So not only do they charge more for those same products and get the money for that, now they're getting even more money back. So when I tell you the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, I'm not making this up, folks. Again, you couldn't just look this up on your own. It's a transfer of wealth. And the wealth isn't going to you and I, the people that paid for it. It's going to the businesses. And I'm not really even faulting the businesses on this one because, again, they've got to do what the government tells them to do. The government imposed these new tariffs, and now as a result, they had to charge more, so we paid more, and now they're getting that money back because SCOTUS said, hey, this was illegal. You can't do this. It's a Ponzi scheme, folks. Just take a look at it. That's what's going on here. So the big businesses, the corporations, they get the money back on top of the money they've already been paid through pricing. And we are the ones that foot the bill, folks. So you lose purchasing power with the tariffs and the inflation, and the big businesses get more money back, more money in their pocket for the same damn goods. It's amazing to me. It's amazing people fall for this nonsense. But I guess most of these people slept through economics. I did not, thankfully, so I understand what's going on here. So expect this to happen. Now, we don't know the extent of what he will do. We have some idea as what he will do, though. We don't know for sure because Greer hasn't told us. But looking in the AP right now, it says here, just giving one example, Canada. It says here, President Trump on Monday imposed a 50% tariffs on most Canadian goods, right? The same country we get our heavy crude oil from that we're in desperate need of. And he did this because he declared that Canada has unfairly discriminated against American autos, alcohol, and dairy products. Oh. Now, ask yourself this question. How the hell do you discriminate against automobiles, alcohol, and dairy products? I'd love to hear the rationale for all this. It says here the move could unleash a new wave of economic chaos. Well, no kidding. With risk of higher inflation and further fraying of relations between the two nations that have been closely woven together before Trump's return to the White House. The administration official previewing the action said that Canada was one of the only nations, other than China, that retaliated against President Trump's previous tariffs and must be held accountable. Either you pay more or we will slap on more tariffs to you. Isn't that nice? So if you don't like those tariffs, we're going to retaliate. We're going to slap on more tariffs. 50%. So let's stop for a second. Think of the heavy crude. Let's just use oil for a second. We get Western Canadian Select that comes into the United States. Fine. So if we have these commodities that come into the United States that are now going to cost 50% more, that means that oil now that comes in the United States is going to cost 50% more. What does that heavy crude oil go to? It goes into diesel. It goes into jet fuel. So if you're flying somewhere, let's say you're flying to Greece this summer, I don't know, pick a country. You're flying somewhere, flying across the country. It doesn't matter what it is. You're going to see your family on the West Coast or the East Coast or in Canada. Who cares where you're going? You're going to pay more for that ticket price now. That fuel that goes into that tractor trailer, that's going to cost more as well. The big rigs, it's going to cost you more now. Cost more for the big rig to ship it. Guess what happens when it gets on the shelf? It's going to cost more because everything is a step in that direction. Costs more to ship it. It's going to cost more on the shelf. So when you say, well, I don't really put diesel in my truck, Jerez, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. Haha. Well, hey, anything you get from the store goes on these big rigs. It's going to cost you more money. Genius. So why you say, well, it doesn't really affect me. Everything with oil affects everybody. Everybody. Globally too, by the way. And you can't get away from the futures that we're seeing right now. That's why when we look at Brent crude every week, we say, yeah, it's going back up. Remember, if it gets above $100 for any length of time, we're going to be hitting a recession very, very soon. And especially when we hit that oil shock because we're simply out of it. We're not importing the necessary amount that we need. That's really going to cause massive chaos all throughout the U.S. and, again, globally as well. Don't say I didn't warn you, by the way. So this, again, is a step in the wrong direction. When we have inflation, why would you put on more taxation? That's what I would say to President Trump. It doesn't make any sense, especially when we're trying to fund this war that we're in right now that seems to have no end in sight. And just to make matters worse, you had Chris Wright, who I call Chris Wrong most of the time now because he's got this really wrong position now with the war that we're in. And here he is talking to ABC now about our stance on the war. Take a listen.
Yeah, look, the president's mission is essential for peace in the Middle East and peace in the world, and that is to prevent Iran from achieving nuclear weapons and to degrade their ability to terrorize their neighbors and the world and global commerce. So, yes, this mission will go on until the mission is done.
But I'm asking you, does he plan retaliation for the killing of those U.S. service members?
It's tragic to lose American lives, but this is a mission that will save countless lives going forward. His focus is on degrading the Iranian ability to terrorize the world, to hold world commerce hostage as they are doing right now, and to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. That is unchanged.
Amazing to me that Chris Wright could be this stupid, who will now be called Chris Wrong, because he's wrong on every single thing he just said to you, ladies and gentlemen. Let's understand something. The Strait was open before the war began. Who started the war? It wasn't the Iranians. It was the United States and Israel. That's who started the war. Are we expecting Iran not to retaliate at all? Of course they would. Why wouldn't they? Right? Self-defense. We keep hearing that all the time, don't we? Self-defense, self-defense. Okay, Iran is conducting self-defense, ladies and gentlemen. We're not happy about that, of course. We were expecting the government to fall. That was the main reason, of course. So now we're in this mission for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. You hear General Keane say this. You see the other dunces that go on Fox News, the retired war generals. We got to keep going. We got to keep going. Finish the job. You hear it ad nauseum, but it makes you sick to your stomach because you're like, you're not going to finish the job. You're not going to finish the job. Now, Chris Wright, who's the energy secretary, I got to give him a little bit of credit, though. At one point, he was actually himself. He was Chris Wright. Now he's Chris Wrong. But at the start of this war, what he did, he's one of the first people in the administration to really oppose the war. Why? Because he said that we really couldn't sustain what was going on with the energy sector. It would be a bad move for us. We wouldn't be able to do it for any real length of time, and he proved to be correct on this. Now, all of a sudden, now he's selling you the war for the mission of preventing nuclear technology. Well, that's not really the case either, because they weren't developing a nuclear bomb. That's just the truth of the matter, folks. And as a result of this, what Chris Wright did, he brought in these oil execs about a month ago, right? So President Trump came out and gave us the announcement. We're about 4 weeks away from depleting what we could use in the Strategic Petroleum Reserves. And he got the oil execs to say, hey, listen, we're going to collapse if you keep this up. And then Trump said, oh, no, we got to make this memorandum of understanding. We've got to come to the table now. This is going on for too long. Well, again, he was right. Now he's wrong. So what's the mission now? To open up the Strait of Hormuz? Well, it was open until we decided to attack them again, Chris. So which one is it? Which one can you put your finger on and say, this is why we're doing this now? None of it makes any sense to anybody with a rational mind. That's why I'm so puzzled by all this. So it's not shocking, though. And by the way, again, just to retort what I just said to you, this comes from the Baltimore Sun. Just to let you know, we're going in the wrong direction now. AAA just came out and released news that the national average for unleaded fuel right now is over $4 a gallon for unleaded. Okay? And this is the first time we've hit this now since June the 17th. All right, but for context, we know, it was $2.84 in mid-January before this ridiculous war, this illegal war began, which I've been opposed to before it even started. Go back and listen to me. I said this to you before. It's going to lead to economic chaos when I turn out to be correct. Here's the kicker, though. We have diesel fuel now. The national average is $5.13 per gallon. Again, the cost of goods are going to start going up, folks, significantly, so long as this war prolongs. So as long as we're in this war, that means the price of oil goes up and the price of diesel will continue to skyrocket. And I wanted to share this with you, too, because California State's average for diesel is $6.47 a gallon, ladies and gentlemen. So if you're trucking in California, your prices are going to continue to skyrocket, thanks to stupidity coming out of Sacramento and, of course, Gavin Newsom not understanding how economics works. So there's all that. Isn't that nice? I thought you'd like that. And just to stay on the economy just for a minute, I know it's not Friday, but I want to just share this with you, folks, because this is coming out so quickly. I've got to go over it with you so you understand. This comes out of Market Watch, and it says here that inflation swallows wage growth for the first time since 2023. American workers are taking a huge pay cut as a result of the inflation, which is a hidden tax, ladies and gentlemen. So here we go. We have consumer prices rising 3.8% in April. We saw the average hourly earnings increase by just 3.6%. That comes right directly from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. A complete reversal marks the first time since April 2023 that inflation has then outpaced wage growth in this country. So whatever wage growth you may have, it's eaten up. You're paying more now for goods, especially when these tariffs roll in again, whatever Trump decides to do on any given day like we saw in 2025. That's why the markets just couldn't adjust to what he was doing, because he kept coming out every single day. Well, China's going to pay $150. Then it was, well, no, they're not going to pay that. Then they are going to pay that. It just went back and forth. We weren't going through Congress as all tariffs must go through, right? That's why we have this in the Constitution. The legislation is the one that is supposed to adhere to and pass all tariffs, all duties, all levies, all excise taxes, all that has to do with Congress, not the president. And then, of course, we get IEEPA shut down. No shock there, because there was no emergency. Right? Trump tried to use trade deficits as emergencies. We've had trade deficits in this country since 1934. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we find ourselves in this chaos. That's what held inflation last year. But as June of 2026, consumer prices rose 3.5%. They were slightly down a little bit because we saw the price of oil drop in June. That's why we saw that. But now everything's going back up. And it's going to continue to go back up as a result of this. Much of the recent increase in inflation really has been just attributed, again, as it says here in this article, to higher energy costs tied to the ongoing conflict in Iran, which is a war. Despite who says it's not to you, it is a war. We're involved in this now. And just for some context, for energy alone, costs have soared 17.9% year over year. So what did I tell you last December, for those of you that have been here this long? I said this to you. I said, we're going to have energy costs going up some 9.2%. May increase from there. It ended up reaching 10.2%. So I wasn't too far off. That's, again, what was predicted. But now, year over year, your energy costs, so if you're using air conditioning in your home, whatever you may do, keep the lights on. Everything now is 17.9% more year over year in the month of April. And that was up from 12.5% in March. So we see that rising. And it's a very steep annual increase in the energy. We haven't seen anything like this since September of 2022, when inflation was the highest in this country. So don't say I didn't warn you, folks, but this is exactly what is going on here. Now, that's not even the brunt of it all. The cost of everything else is going up as well. We see households now feeling the squeeze across a wide range of everyday expenses. Again, going back to what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is telling us, reporting that costs from the groceries to electricity are up between 0.7 and 6.1% respectively. It's amazing, folks. It's amazing. So wage growth down in this country, it's totally wiped out by inflation. We should all be very, very miffed about all of this, unfortunately. Most people simply do not care, apparently. So you're taking a pay cut right now. If you got a nice 3% raise recently, it's all eaten up by what's going on in the war with Iran. And that will continue to get worse as time goes on. All right, folks, let's again shift our gears over to maybe something a little positive here. This comes out of the Washington Examiner. And it says arrests by ICE have surged in recent weeks to the highest level seen in the Trump administration. In the first 11 days of July, ICE averaged 1,593 arrests of suspected illegal aliens daily, up from the previous record of just 1,300 arrests per day in June. Now, while everyone's sitting there clapping and saying, siege erased, great job. Look, I mean, this should be done. This is what Trump ran on. He ran on getting rid of illegal aliens in this country and mass deportations. The problem with all this, while this is good, while this is a step in the right direction, you have to understand something. You had, under Joe Biden, lunch moron Joe, right? Remember he called himself lunch bucket Joe? He's a lunch moron. That's what he is, okay? That's what his administration was. They let in anywhere from 10 to 15,000 people every single day of his administration. We had roughly 20 million illegal aliens in just that short span of time. So now you have the crisis with the housing market because now you have 20 million people now you have to house in some capacity, one way or another, which put a strain on the housing market. Those prices are going up. They're the highest they've ever been. But if we're only taking some 1,500 out every single day, and let's say that continues on, even if we were to continue doing that, this entire presidency, which, again, we haven't been doing, you're still under 1 million people. Well, ladies and gentlemen, just under Biden, we had 20 million get in the country. So you've got to go well beyond that 15,000 every single day to arrest, to obviously go through hearings and deport later on. Again, it's a long process that should be taken. So we're nowhere near where we need to be. That's the problem. Now, ICE is set to track at least 50,000 arrests in July alone, but again, it totally doesn't even mirror what we saw under the Biden administration. Just under the Biden administration, that 20 million figure, we already had at least 25 million in the country prior to that. So we're not even going to excuse what Joe Biden did. We're not even going to negate that at any time whatsoever. So while I like the number increases, they're still far from where they need to be, of course. Again, this is far surpassing what we saw in June's total of 43,138 people that were arrested by ICE. The previous record high was 42,107 set back in December, so things are going in the right direction under Mark Wayne Mullen, which I think he's doing a fairly good job. I got to be honest with you. I think he's doing a good job. But the numbers have got to go up. And I got to tell you something, too. Greg Bovino, who was dismissed over what took place in Minneapolis earlier in this year when the shootings took place of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy, he was dismissed, and he might work still for ICE, but he was dismissed. He had a plan to remove 100 million illegal aliens. So why is he no longer in the position where he can do this? Why is he not working with Tom Homan, Mark Wayne Mullen, to execute this policy? We know we've got this number of illegal aliens in the country. Now, for all of you that are rolling your eyes, hear me out for a second. We had 25 million estimated. This was through a Yale study back in 2020 or 2021. Right? We kept hearing 11 million over and over again. Okay, 11 million. Well, it was never updated. And then they figured that it was anywhere between 22 and 25 million. Well, I'll go with the higher figure because I'm sure they were being conservative in this. We've got to say to ourselves, okay, it was 25 million before Joe Biden took office. And now Joe Biden brought in another 20 million people. Now, simple basic math tells us that's at least 45 million illegals just in the country at the onset of President Trump taking office in 2025. So 45 million. we have an estimation of 55 million expired visa holders that are still residing inside the United States right now. So, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that are not good at math, 45 plus 55 equals 100 million people. Greg Bovino's plan was to remove 100 million illegal aliens. Why is he still not in his position? Why is he not implementing? Why can't he just allow the plan to be implemented? He doesn't have to be out in the streets. He doesn't have to be the face of anything. Tom Homan could do that. Follow the policy. Follow the law. Get rid of illegal aliens. Now what you have, though, right, this is coming up, and I saw this the other day. The Trump administration now wants to have a temporary protected status for all farm workers in the United States. So we went from carrying out mass deportations to, we're going to go after the bad ones, the really bad apples, right? The ones, that Tim Walz wants to coddle and protect and pardon, right? The people that rape 10-year-olds from Laos. We're not going to say, well, we're going to give you temporary protected status now, just because we got to. Because what's going to happen to these massive farms now? So when I talk about, the Department of Agriculture is junk, that's exactly what I mean. They did their damnedest to get rid of small farmers. These are people that are running a small operation business. Whether you see a farm is important or not, obviously it is. So, the 100, 110, 120, 130, these small farms, they want to get rid of them. They want to have these massive farms that are, 3,000 head of cattle to be milked. So it's an operation. It's what they call a factory farm. Well, you got to have people work it. But the problem is, and by the way, I went and looked this up for you yesterday too, just to share some data with you, ladies and gentlemen. I said to myself, how are the farms doing right now? What are farmers making? Are they making a good profit right now in the dairy market? Well, when you look at the figures right now, it costs, ladies and gentlemen, just to have 100 pounds of milk per day to be produced. In this country, on average, you get $23.56 per 100 pounds of milk. Now, here's the problem. They're only getting paid $21.30 per 100 pounds of milk. So that means you are losing $2.26 in your cost. You're not breaking even, ladies and gentlemen. That's so the water, the bedding, the feed, and what have you, and the cost for the farm and maintenance itself, you're losing out on this. So you have just at least anywhere between, I would have to say, just using a 2024 figure, you're losing at least $400 per cow that you have. And so how can you hire somebody to work this operation with you, pay for the electricity, pay for the feed, pay for the water? You're not going to do it. You're not going to break even. You're going to lose money. Otherwise, you got to take a loan out. And so how would you break even? Well, it would require milk prices to go anywhere between roughly $23.56 for every 100 pounds of milk of which you produce. But you're not doing that. So now they have to have these workers. You bring in illegal aliens. They obviously underpay them. They're not getting any benefits, of course. Unless, of course, you're in California and Gavin Newsom gives you free health care, free housing, free clothing, free food, paid for by you, the Californian, which I did for quite some time. This is the problem. This is the problem. And that's why we run into these major issues, ladies and gentlemen. So when I hear this, I say, well, it makes sense. You have the administration buckling because what are you going to do then? And I'm so sick of hearing people say, well, Gerace, they're there to work the job because no one else will. No, that's incorrect. No one else is going to work it for that price at which they're underpaying these people. So don't give me this crap, no one will work the job. No one will work the job as it is, as it exists, as the system is schemed against the worker. Now, the people coming in from wherever will work that job because they want to take a job. I'm not saying they're not working hard, but obviously that's what it comes down to. They want cheap labor and they want them in these fields. That's what it all comes down to. So when I hear stuff like this, so are you going to reward bad behavior? Or are you actually going to carry out on what you promised us? Mass deportations. Now, if you actually had a system in place where farmers were able to set their own prices, which I believe should happen. They're the ones producing the product. They know what the cost is, and we know that the producer costs are going up as time goes on. If we're doing this, then we can actually see farms improve, and things would actually get better. But we're not seeing that because look what the U.S. Department of Agriculture does. They lowball the farmers, so the farmers either have to take out loans or they go broke. They get to decide. What would they like to do? Take out more loans or go broke? That's the way the U.S. government has it set up, folks, sadly enough. That'll do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you for being here and sharing the show as always. Make sure you're always staying prepped, folks, with all your essentials when we face these times of uncertainty. I did tell you things are going to get worse, so please stock up if you can. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you back here tomorrow as always. Until then, stay busy, be good. God bless.